Good evening, and thank you for joining us for a special edition of Addiction Talk. If you are not aware, today is International Overdose Awareness Day. We wanted to bring together a panel of experts to talk about one of the biggest culprits behind the rise in overdose deaths across the country. Take a listen.
People are being exposed to fentanyl without knowing it, and because it's so highly potent, people are dying at unprecedented rates.
We have had, more overdose deaths in 1 year than we did of COVID deaths in our city.
Eugene's police is warning about fentanyl. EPD says they've had 2 more overdose deaths related to the drug.
Tonight, we've brought together a panel of experts at our facilities across the country who are really on the front lines of dealing with those who are struggling with addiction, but they also are often in the community to see what is going on and why we're seeing this rise in overdose deaths, and to help us understand more about fentanyl, the drug that we keep hearing about on the news. What is it? We're going to answer all those questions here tonight, but we also want you, our viewers, if you have a question, please drop it into the chat. We'll make sure to get our experts to answer as many questions as possible, because we want you to walk away tonight with information to save a life. At the end, make sure you stay with us to the very end. We're going to have a live demo of how to administer the overdose reversing drug Narcan. It is a lifesaver. We have seen it save lives, even among our panelists. So make sure you stay tuned to the very end. We'll be doing that as well as taking your questions. My panelists tonight, I have Dr. Charles Smith. He is an addictionologist over at our Recovery Treatment Center in Florida. His colleague, Dr. Eric Lipnack, also an addictionologist at Recovery First Treatment Center. We have Philip Van Gilder, who's a community relations director at our Greenhouse Treatment Center, who's often on the front lines, really active in the community there, and has actually revived his own son from an overdose. So he has a lot of perspective. And then we have our director of nursing, Rebecca Westergaard, who is at Laguna Treatment Hospital located in California. Thank you all for joining us tonight for this very important conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's jump right into it. Many people, as I said, Dr. Smith, have been hearing fentanyl. What is fentanyl? For the average person, how would you help them understand what this drug is?
Well, fentanyl is an opiate. My first experience with it, I'm not exactly sure when it was invented, but I started hearing about it in 1982 as I was an intern. I remember talking to the anesthesiology residents that it was used as a general anesthetic and to aid in anesthesia. And the term they used then was called an ultra narcotic. And what they meant by that was a very, very powerful narcotic with a rapid onset of action. And that brand of fentanyl, that type of fentanyl, also had a very short half-life. So the difference between heroin, morphine, oxycodone, Dilaudid, and fentanyl is completely synthetic. It's not from the opium plant. It's completely manufactured in the lab. So the natural resource of opium and opium plants is not necessary in its manufacture. So that allows it to be manufactured very cheaply and also very potent. The estimated potency of fentanyl is 1,000 times more than morphine, and it can be more depending on the concentration.
Go ahead, Dr. Schmidt, sorry.
Depending on the concentration, it can even be more than 1,000 times more powerful than heroin or morphine. And that's the problem with the illicit drug market. There is no quality control. So these things obviously would be smuggled in the smallest container and the most elusive possible. But then when they're cut with other agents, there's really no quality control to determine the strength.
And so if I understand you correctly, Dr. Smith, I'm going to stop you right there. what people were getting in a hospital that started out as a narcotic that could help with pain or surgery and things like that, because it was a synthetic and not naturally derived, it became illicit. People began making it on the streets. And how was that different from what people might see in a doctor's office? Was it that much different? I know you talked about quality control or what's in it, but helping people understand the difference between the two.
Well, the strength was we couldn't account for just how strong it would be. It may be weak, and like I said, maybe up to 1,000 times stronger, as well as the impurities involved in it. It may be mixed with other drugs, methamphetamine, cocaine, benzodiazepines, any of our pharmaceutical sedatives. It's even crossed over, and I've heard of patients having their marijuana laced with fentanyl.
Right.
So it impermeated the illicit drug world because of the ease of making it, for one, and its massive strength, and that's basically what got it there. I
Mhm.
mean,
So when
people with substance use disorder want something of high power.
Mhm. So when we're thinking about this, and you're saying, that there's being made on the streets, people can't guarantee the potency, what it's being mixed in. I want to go to some of our people who are, I know you do treat people who are dealing with this, but I know particularly Philip, you are boots on the grounds in the community. What are you all seeing there in terms of the forms of fentanyl and how it's showing up?
Yeah, I think Dr. Smith alluded to it. Right now, there's not possible to buy a drug on the street that's not been corrupted with fentanyl. It's just not possible. The economies of scale, as he said, there's no labor involved. You put some analogs together, you blend it, and you put whatever you've got in it. And so we're seeing all sorts of derivatives, but it's fentanyl is the primary load-bearing chemical, and then added to that whatever benzos, crystal meth. Of course, we talked about it in the past, the xylazine, just whatever the dealer has. And the one thing we see is the dealer that sells you fentanyl, and it may have sold someone else marijuana, but he's weighing it all on the same scale. So it doesn't matter what drug you're getting from that dealer, it's got fentanyl on it, even if it's tainted just during the scale, when they were measuring.
And when we think about this, Rebecca, I'm going to go to you. How dangerous is fentanyl? I mean, Philip's talking about just it being, a dealer working with marijuana, and maybe he was selling fentanyl to somebody else, but just that cross contamination. How much can be deadly or very serious for someone, especially, when we're thinking about this being illicitly made?
Right. And it's hard to say. And the reason I say it's hard to say is because we're not looking at fentanyl made in a lab, as Dr. Smith said. We're not looking at things that are consistent. So there are constant new analogs of fentanyl that are being developed on a daily basis, coming from China, coming from Mexico, all these different areas. And so with that, we don't know exactly how potent this could be. I will tell you, a traditional fentanyl, I had a doctor always tell me, if you look at a penny, the amount of fentanyl that can fit on Abraham Lincoln's eye could kill you. With old original analogs of fentanyl, I believe it's about 2 milligrams can kill a person. But here's the deal. We don't know what we're getting. We don't know what analogs, some of these newer analogs, think isofentanyl that's coming through the East Coast. That is significantly more potent than what we know of fentanyl. And so it could be even less that could affect that. And with new derivatives that are being created on a daily basis, we have no idea what we're putting into our body anytime we take a substance.
And Dr. Lipnack, I want to bring you into this conversation too, as an addictionologist. For someone who comes across this, who maybe was using meth or some other drug, and they're exposed to fentanyl, is it highly addictive, or is it more dangerous when you think about it compared to other drugs?
Well, the danger is really in the potency and the amount. Rarely, as Dr. Smith, as we've all said, you just don't know how strong it is. And somebody who's been using, I'll give you an example, somebody using 10 bags of heroin a day, and they go into treatment, and they come out of treatment, and now they're going to use 10 bags again, and they can't. It kills them because they're opiate naive. They could start maybe with 1 bag or 2 bags, but they can't start with 10 bags again. Now with fentanyl, we have no idea how much they're getting. No idea. At least with heroin, you knew a bag was a bag. With this, you don't know.
Ooh, that's a really good point.
Not that it was that clear, but basically, this is so different than anything else.
So, Dr. Lipnick, I just want to piggyback on that. Has that made it more difficult to treat? Like you said, if someone typically came into one of our treatment centers who was struggling with heroin, you could say, what was your habit? How much were you using? You could get an idea. But with fentanyl, we don't really know. So does that make detoxing them and going through that process different or more concerning?
You have to be more judicious. No, it's not more difficult. We can detox somebody from fentanyl as well as we can detox them from anything else. But we'll watch them and make sure that we are giving them a sufficient amount so that their detox is not unbearable. Mm-hmm. Now, detox is always a little uncomfortable. We say that up front, but it doesn't have to be unbearable. But we get people that take so much, and they don't know it. They have no idea how much they take. Mm-hmm. No idea how much they take. Mm-hmm. So we're kind
of, Dr. Smith, when you think about this, when you think about the number of people who are now coming into our facilities, do you find the majority of them, because Philip said, hey, it's in everything now. You don't know, or the chances are that's in everything. Are you finding the majority of people coming to our treatment centers have fentanyl as part of their drug cocktail?
It's interesting you say that. And I started to think back on that. I think I can only remember 1 or 2 patients that I've admitted that weren't taking fentanyl.
So out of, okay, let me stop you here. Did you say
opiate patients, not alcoholics?
Well, let me make sure I'm understanding you there, Dr. Lipnick, because I think that's an important point to touch on. Are you saying that of all the patients that you've admitted that were addicted to some type of opioid, the majority of them only had fentanyl in their system?
The vast majority, but not only fentanyl, they'll have benzos in their system. Somebody who's addicted will take anything that's available. So you're always getting a little mix and a little override on what's going to be in somebody's system. Mm-hmm. But it's
Dr. Smith, I thought you were going to piggyback on that.
Oh, I totally agree that it's a mixed bag on what they buy on the street. There is one phenomena here that's worth mentioning with fentanyl. There's a phenomena associated with fentanyl where ordinarily the ones we produce for anesthesia, et cetera, have a shorter half-life. These analogs, like our nurse spoke of, are much different, and we have a big problem with precipitated withdrawal. Quite often, we have to wait 48 hours before we can administer buprenorphine. This was something we didn't necessarily have to do with heroin. It was much more predictable. And that makes it difficult for patients because early on, then we can only use comfort medications before we can use our main medication, which is buprenorphine. And it works well with buprenorphine, but as Dr. Lipnick says, we may have to adjust the dose some for, say, someone who was using oxycodone or Oxycontin. It may be quite a bit different how much buprenorphine we have to give. So 2 big problems, the delay in giving it and how much to give. I'd say these patients are more difficult than our old oxycodone, Oxycontin heroin patients who usually detox very smooth. These are more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we think about how fentanyl impacts the body, Rebecca, what does fentanyl do to the body?
You know, I would say different analogs we have seen in California have been doing some different things. Generally, the biggest issue you're going to worry about is respiratory depression. And when I say that, that means you stop breathing. And if you start mixing it with other drugs that have that risk of stopping your breathing, such as additional opiates, benzodiazepines, some of the new illicit things like xylazine we've talked about, that's going to actively increase it even more and make that risk even higher than you would if you were just doing the opiate. And so it makes it even that much more deadly. Can you get high from it? Yes. Can you get too high from it? Yes. Can you die? 100% yes.
You keep talking about, Rebecca, fentanyl analogs, and the average person may go, what are we talking about? Can you help us understand what you're meaning, that there are different versions of this? I want to make sure people can understand what that means.
Yeah, so you have the original, you have fentanyl that was created by researchers, approved by the FDA. That was fentanyl. That's what we still even use in the hospital now to treat some people for certain things, right? But then you have people who take it and they change that chemical just slightly. So maybe it's more potent, or maybe it has XYZ side effects. So it's just these little tiny changes that have an effect on how the drug affects the body. And then when that next one, they find, oh, this is good about it, but this part is bad. Now they're in the lab, they're tweaking it, and they're trying to find these new ways to change the chemical makeup so that it can, have the ultimate effect, which is, the elated high that you get from opiates. But the problem is, when they're doing that, they are making the high better in that sense, but they're making it more and more deadly.
Do we know, Dr. Smith, how long fentanyl can stay in the body?
Anywhere from 42 to 96 hours. We're going to see it on the urines, and even in some cases, depending on the analog, up to 2 weeks. Just because it's in the urine, though, doesn't tell you that it's on the receptors in the brain. So these analogs make it virtually unpredictable for us to say how long it's going to last in the body. So that when the answer is 48 hours to 2 weeks, that's not a very good answer. But that's what we're facing.
I could see that. And there used to be a time, Philip, where we heard people didn't know that they were getting fentanyl. Like they were surprised. They would come to treatment and say, I didn't take fentanyl. I'm surprised that's in my system. But now we're hearing more and more stories of people saying they're seeking out the drug, that fentanyl is becoming the drug of choice. Why do you think, or why are you hearing that this is happening, that we have people who were unknowingly taking it, but now people actually seeking it out?
Well, it goes to something that I think Dr. Lipnick said. When you got the monkey on your back, the monkey's got to be fed, and you're gonna do whatever it takes to feed that monkey, and you don't have a choice. And the more potent the food is, the better the monkey likes it. And so it's like, I remember when I was growing up, we had marijuana was a big deal, Mary Jane. And people would get marijuana and they go, oh, wow, you got to get this because this is really great marijuana or whatever. Today, it's the same thing, except it's not marijuana anymore. It's fentanyl. And people will go seek a dealer that someone has said, oh, what he offers is even stronger than what you've been buying. Again, fentanyl is not detectable. We brought enough fentanyl in the 8 ports in Texas last year to kill 130 million people just in the 8 ports in Texas. And that was only 1/3 of what we believe came through the 8 ports in Texas. You're buying death.
And what's interesting to me that you said about that is, with these different analogs, these different versions that they're creating, are we able, and I think I'm going to take this one to Rebecca, are we able to detect all of the different deviations of fentanyl?
Yeah, and that's the scary thing, is we can't. We do use fentanyl test strips here at our facility, right? So we're testing urine for people to see if they have it, because even, as we said, some people don't know they have it, and we want to be we're treating them accordingly. So we're going to do that, and we're going to test that urine. The scary thing is, there's so many new analogs out there that science for these test strips hasn't caught up to it. So there are a lot of analogs that are out there that do not show up on test strips. Sometimes we can send them out for lab confirmation, and they can do a much more deeper dive to see it's there. But there are some, as I've mentioned, isofentanyl. Right now, we have no way to detect it. There's no way to detect isofentanyl in somebody's urine. Of course, that's going to eventually happen, but then the next analog is going to come out and we're going to be back in the same place.
That's
Can
really
can I jump in on that a little
yeah,
bit?
sure,
Just for a
Philip. I'd
second?
love to hear your insight.
When I'm on the street, we give out fentanyl test strips. It's not something that I like to do, but some people, very well-meaning people, give it out. The disappointment is the person that's trying to buy fentanyl is not going to test it, and it's a false sense of security, like Rebecca just said. You test, maybe your friend tests it and says, "Oh, I tested it; it's good." It doesn't tell you, going back to what both of our physicians have said about the intensity of the potency of the fentanyl. And so those test strips, although we have to do it here as a licensed facility, when we give it to people on the street, I think we're doing more harm than good when I see people handing that out. That's like saying I'm going to be my own, physician. Not a good idea.
Yeah, I can imagine, because we're seeing record number of people overdosing and dying. Dr. Lipnack, why do you think we're seeing record number of overdoses? I mean, we've had heroin around for years. We've had other drugs around for years, but never this kind of explosion in the number of overdose deaths that we're hearing about. I mean, just look at that number on the screen. It's crazy when you think about it. So why do you think that we're seeing, now that fentanyl's behind this, we're seeing this huge rise in the number of deaths?
Because it's so easy to bring in. Such a small amount can do so much damage. And it was a good analogy. They used to bring marijuana in big bales. Well, then they figured out, well, wait a minute, I could get cocaine, and they were bringing it in a smaller bale. Now they have fentanyl that they can put in their watch pocket, and that's enough. And that's where the rubber hits the road, and we're in trouble. And it's not going to get better for a long time, because people are going to continue to use it. It's not that expensive, and it gives them the high they want, but they just don't know how high they're going to get, and they don't understand the danger.
I will say here in California, fentanyl is by far the number one drug of choice that we're seeing in this state. And I'm sure other states are coming up on that additionally. And so it's just scary. It's really scary to see that marijuana is laced with it, methamphetamine is laced with it, and people are like, oh, I'm just smoking a little weed. Well, it's a good chance that it's compromised, and you don't know, you've never had it before. You're at risk for addiction from using it, and you're also at risk for death.
And when we look at some of the drug combinations, Rebecca, you touched on it, but what other ones are we seeing? Maybe Dr. Smith, can you touch on this? I know we talked about people taking meth with the fentanyl, or marijuana with fentanyl. What are some of the most common drug combinations that you're seeing?
Very common with methamphetamine and cocaine both. Not unusual for just a cannabis user to have it laced with fentanyl. Quite often these patients are shocked when we tell them they had fentanyl in their system, because they say, there's no way, I'm not even an opiate user. There's no way I had fentanyl. But as we said, the illicit drug market has no quality control. Whether it comes through in the scales, in the laboratory, in shipping, it gets tainted. So there really isn't an admission now I have, other than store-bought alcohol, that I don't worry about fentanyl being contaminated in.
So when we think about this and we talk about the rise in overdoses related to fentanyl, Philip, what are the signs to look for that someone is actually overdosing on this? I know you have revived your son from an overdose. You've also helped to revive others. So you've actually experienced what an overdose looks like. How would you describe it to someone who hasn't encountered that before?
It's real easy. The two ways I think about it is when I see someone that's either they're quiet, they're asleep, they appear to be asleep, or someone that's breathing but with a death snore, like they sound like they're snoring. That's someone that's actively using. They've actually got it in their system, and it's doing what Rebecca just said, opioids on the receptors, and now the motor system shuts down. They're not breathing or doing anything. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and
I'm going to have
see,
you say that
so
again
there's
because
two
I'm getting a
conditions.
little. Can you hold for me 1 second, Philip? I'm getting a little background
Yeah.
noise there. Someone, I don't know if somebody has their phone on or something, but I'm hearing a recording or something in the background.
On August 31st, we launched a campaign called 11 Minutes Counting.
I just want to make sure because I'm hearing something in the background. Just want to make sure that we're not that everybody can hear what we're saying here. So thank you. So I want to go back to Philip. You were saying if you could talk about the symptoms of the overdose, what we should be looking for again.
So when I see anybody that's in a position where they're a prone position, typically, although I don't know that I've ever seen anybody in anything but a prone position in the ones that I've resuscitated, but typically they'll either be in a prone position and they won't be breathing, or I have some personal experience where they were breathing, but they weren't asleep. I can tell because we call it a death snore, where they start to, their tongue is making noise. It's like they're snoring, and then they won't, when you address them, you touch their forehead or you scream at them or you rub their sternum, they don't respond, and they're doing that snore. That means that they're in active overdose at that moment. If they're not breathing and they don't respond, you certainly can assume that they're in we're not talking about just kids. When I'm teaching people, it's the person that's sitting across from you at work. It's your grandfather that couldn't get any more Oxycontin, and his grandson said, "Don't worry, Pop, I'll get you some on the street." It's there's no age limit, no discrimination anymore.
And I think that's important to point out too, because many people wonder if I encounter someone who is overdosing. You talked about like this death gargle. You talked about being unresponsive. You talked about trying to wake them. You know, one of the things that has been really big is promoting overdose reversing drugs. One of the main manufacturers of this is Narcan as an option to reverse an overdose. So Rebecca, I know that you're going to demonstrate for us how Narcan works, and how effective is it on fentanyl? I know we have all these different analogs. So should everyone try it if they suspect that someone has an overdose? And what are your thoughts on its effectiveness for different types of fentanyl analogs, different derivatives, as we've been talking about?
So if you don't know what you're taking, we don't know what's necessarily going to reverse it, right? Now, if it is truly an opiate, if it truly is fentanyl, then Narcan or naloxone is going to help reverse it. Now, depending on that analog, it could be 4 milligrams, it could be 30 milligrams. I have recently had a patient, we had to use quite a bit of Narcan, and a lot of people were shocked how much we had to use, because back in the day, a 4 milligram intranasal Narcan brought somebody back. And now at our facilities, I'll show you, this is the new Narcan we use, if we can see. So it's a brand called Cloxado. It's actually 8 milligram Narcan. So in the most Narcan you will find, what you can get over the counter at your pharmacy is going to be 4 milligrams per dose. It's such an intense need for Narcan to revive some of these people we're seeing that our AAC facilities no longer carry the 4 milligram. We carry the 8 milligram on our body at all time. And I have a 4 milligram one here, just see if anyone can see. I apologize for my lights. This is what you're going to find at the pharmacy. It is over the counter. You don't need a doctor's prescription. You can buy it. Anybody can carry Narcan. Anybody can administer Narcan. And one thing I also want to say is there are no negative side effects to Narcan unless you're overdosing from an opiate. So if you're pregnant, you can have it. It's not going to affect the baby. And to make a point, I am actually going to Narcan myself live to show you there is nothing wrong. Because I am not under the effect of opiates, there will not be any effect to my body. And I just want to make that point so strong of this is a very, very safe drug, so safe that it is legally over the counter in most states. And I'm sorry if I'm over speaking for some of the other states represented here. In California, it is 100% over the counter. I'll show you as I do it. This is what the Narcan looks like. You're going to see a little plunger down here at the bottom. And then you have the nasal area here. This is what's going to actually go into the nostril. You want to stick it all the way into the nostril. And when you're going to press this button, you're going to leave it in the nostril after you depress it for a good few seconds because you want all the medication coming out of that to get into that body. The way you would hold a Narcan is your thumb will be on the depressor and then your two fingers are going to be right on top. And that's going to give you leverage to be able to pop it in effectively. So again, this is going to go in my nose. See, it's in my nostril. I'm going to push it up. Nothing. So you see it's depressed now. All the medicine is out. I left it in for just a second. My nose feels wet. There is no side effects. I'm not feeling dizzy.
You just did that live. That was a live version of Narcan to demonstrate to people that even if you encounter someone and you suspect they're overdosing, but maybe they're not, and you give it to them, you're not doing any harm to that person. It's only going to impact them if they're actually on an opioid.
Correct.
It's only going to impact them in that. And as you said, that was, they're the kind that you get over the counter is 4 milligrams. We now at our facilities carry around 8 just because some of these fentanyl analogs are so powerful that you may have to give more than one dose. So what does somebody do in that instant, Rebecca? If they give the one and they see a little bit of impact, can they give another dose of that? And do they do it in the same nostril? What is your recommendation?
Yeah. So you can give more Narcan. And in a lot of cases that we're seeing nowadays, you need as much Narcan as you can. And there's no such thing as overdosing on Narcan. So if somebody's not coming to, you just keep popping it in if you have it. Most Narcan that comes in California, at least, there's 2 in a pack. So that gives you a little bit of extra leverage, right? In case you need a second dose. You want to make sure that you are giving it approximately 2 to 3 minutes. I will tell you, in somebody who's really, really not responding, you can put it in less than that and it's not going to hurt them. But on average, you want to say about 2 to 3 minutes per dose. And again, with the 8 milligram Narcans, we're having used 3, 4. I've even had 5 8 milligram Narcans we've had to put into somebody before we were able to revive them back to life. And so this is very, very serious.
So you've had it one time having to use 5 8 milligram doses just to revive somebody back.
Not at this site. I've seen that equivalent amount used on the street, though, unfortunately.
Wow. So, Philip, take me through what happens when somebody is revived. What should we expect? You've given them the Narcan. They come back to, Rebecca talks about, you want to get them breathing because, as she mentioned, the fentanyl really affects the respiratory system, making the person unable to breathe. And so it's like they're suffocated, really. So what happens when you come out of this?
Let me also compliment what Rebecca said. But the first thing anybody should do is dial 911 because the Narcan is going to work, but it's going to fade out. And no matter how much you have with you, you need EMTs on their way. So that's going to be the first thing. Second thing I always do is I go in with my finger and check their mouth. I'm looking for what they call a rig or syringe cap, the orange cap on a syringe, because oftentimes a person that's injecting will put the syringe up to their mouth, pull it off, inject themselves. The cap is in their mouth and they pass out during injection, and that cap is still in there, and you don't want to try to revive them with that cap in the airway. And then you get them in, if they're breathing, but with the death snore, you can just put it right in the nose and help them breathe if they need it. But most people aren't going to be breathing, and you'll have to start doing CPR because Narcan by itself, without CPR, will go nowhere. I actually carry a syringe and liquid Narcan, naloxone, and so that's what I use and I put it in the muscular part of the body because I want it to get into the body. But that's the thing you got to do is you got to get them to breathe again. That'll circulate the naloxone, which will move the opioid off the receptors. Once that happens and they begin to breathe and they start to come out of it, oftentimes people aren't sure where they are. They're mixed up and they'll be okay. You have to explain to them what just happened and keep them calm. And you may have to give them more Narcan again. Sometimes they'll come out of it, but they're coming out in total withdrawal and they're not happy. In that case, if you've already called 911, you want to step far enough away so that there's no issue and talk to them from a distance because they're not going to be happy, especially heavy fentanyl user, heavy opioid users who, and many of them have been through this on this. I had a gentleman I go down on this, I think it was like his sixth time.
Mm.
You know, I mean, first time for me with him, but it was his sixth time. As he was trying to explain to me, he'd been through 6 of these overdoses. And it's not uncommon to see 10 or 15.
Wow. That's sad when we really think about it. You know, Dr. Lipnack, as we're talking about people overdosing and the number of times people are overdosing, do you find that these patients, they're patients that maybe have gone through treatment? Does that make them more susceptible? Who's at risk, you know, to overdosing?
It's a really good question. Everybody's at risk because once they start using opioids, it is such a difficult thing to beat. And yes, we get people that have been there 5, 10, 20 times. They've gone through detox. They've overdosed 4, 5, 10 times. And they go back and they use it again. The drive is so strong to continue to use it. You've got to be able to educate them and get them to follow through. And that's difficult. If you go to a physical therapist and they say to you, "Well, go home and do this exercise," most people don't do it. If you say to these people, "You're going to go home, I want you to get a therapist, I want you to start going to meetings, and I want you to go to meetings as many nights as you can, and I want you to get a sponsor, and I want you to relate to that sponsor, and before you pick up the phone, because they'll always be there." But how many people have said to me, "Yeah, I just wanted to use it. I just wanted to use it." And that's a tough thing to beat.
Mm-hmm. And you know, when you think about that, the sad part is we do see people who relapse, but with the fentanyl, we're seeing more people dying. You know, it could be you could overdose before, but we're seeing more people dying. And Dr. Smith, I think you really have an important message to share because you're someone who is in recovery. And I think when people hear this or families hear this, they may feel like, is this hopeless? You know, we're hearing about this rise in overdose deaths. As Dr. Lipnack said, it can be really challenging. You know, we're seeing all of this and we're hearing the numbers, we're hearing the headlines. Is there hope? I mean, what do you say to people? Because they hear this and they may feel like, well, what's the use? Do I give up?
Yes, I agree with you, and thank you. Anytime I admit a patient who tells me they're hopeless and they can't get better, or a family member, I share my experience with recovery. I was addicted to opiates for 20 years. Now I'm 13 years clean and sober. Message I want to get across is treatment works if you're a compliant patient. And Dr. Lipnick described it perfectly. You have to be compliant. You have to do aftercare, the meetings, the sponsor, the sober support group. It's a lifestyle change. And then that urge will go away and smarter brains will prevail, and you'll know it's a very bad decision to use. But you can't do it alone. So what I always recommend to patients and families, don't attempt to do this alone. Get professional help. Compliant patients get better. No different than hypertension, diabetes, or any of our other diseases. We need patient compliance.
Okay, good information. We have a question coming in. What can the drug rehab programs offer to keep those people that are battling both drugs and mental health issues at the same time? This is a really good question because we often see, and I'm going to let you answer this, Dr. Lipnack, we often see people come in with an addiction to drugs, but also struggling with the mental health. They often go hand in hand, depression or different things like schizophrenia or other mental health challenges. How do we treat both at the same time? How are we able to help people so that they have the best chance of success or succeeding in their recovery?
It's challenging because most of our patients are dual diagnosis.
And what do you mean by dual diagnosis? I want to make sure.
They either have severe depression, severe anxiety, they're bipolar, and the list goes on. And they're self-medicating with these medications. And it works for a while until it doesn't work anymore. So you have to start to detox them appropriately, and then start to give them other medications that will fill the need that they have. If somebody severely has anxiety, we give them anti-anxiety drugs. If they're depressed, we give them antidepressants. And those drugs will take care of part of that. But then they need therapy because these people have been out there a long, long time doing this. And the amount of therapy they need it's hard to quantify because you need so much, and you've got to be willing to do the work. Mm-hmm. And if you do the work, you can get better. Look, I see patients every day, and some of them, I look at them and I say, not a chance. You can just feel it. And other patients come in and you say, they're going to make it. They're going to make it. They're there because they decided they wanted to come, not because their wife wanted them to come or their boss wanted them to come or they got arrested. They just came because I'm so tired of doing this. And some of those people will fail too. Don't get me wrong. But at least they have a better shot at this than a lot of other people do.
So Rebecca, hearing Dr. Lipnack talk about that we try to treat them at the same time. How common is it that most patients come in that you're treating that you see that have both, that they're struggling with some type of mental health condition and they're struggling with an addiction? And why do we think that we see them in combination, that it's not usually just somebody just having an addiction, but that they often are in tandem?
I mean, I would say that 90+% of what we see have some co-occurring mental health issues in addition to the addiction. And one thing I always like to say is it's like the chicken or the egg situation, right? So what comes first, the trauma or the addiction, right? And then they fuel each other, right? So I, as a woman, become addicted to fentanyl, and now I have lower, reserve to not, maybe I'm doing things I wouldn't have done had I been sober. And I'm hanging out with a different crowd that's more dangerous. I'm putting myself in dangerous situations. Now I'm hypothetically sexually assaulted. So now I have trauma. And so then I'm not dealing with it in the right way. So I go back to drugs, which leads me to further potentially be, assaulted or incarcerated or whatever it could be. And it becomes this vicious cycle that goes around. And unless you have an abrupt stop to it and a desire to really commit to it, it's just going to keep feeding itself in this circle.
And what about for people, it starts with the mental health, maybe a depression or anxiety, and they just want to feel normal. So they're turning to these drugs just to cope. Same kind of scenario that you see?
I mean, it can be. Some people that is a very true statement. They don't know what to do, and somebody offers them something, and they're like, "Oh, well, this kind of makes me feel better." Like Dr. Lipnick said, for a while it does work and it helps, and then by that time when it's not working anymore, they're already addicted. Their brain chemistry is already needing this, and so now they're at a point where it's not working anymore, but they still have to do it. They have to feed that body with that medication. And so it's a really sad situation that it then fuels each other, goes back to that cycle I said, and now you're even more depressed or you're more anxious. And it's not effective in the long run.
If I could add something, so I can't, how many patients come in and say, I just didn't want to get sick. We know when they stop taking, they're going to get sick.
Yeah.
So they continue to use over and over again. And I remember the first time I heard that, it just was, What? You don't want to get sick? And then I learned more. And the more I learned, the more I realized these people if you watch somebody detox, it isn't pretty. They're not going to die. They're going to wish they died because it can be that unpleasant. But what we do is we try to make it as pleasant as humanly possible. And some of them just won't believe that what we're doing is okay. No, I need more. No, you didn't give me enough. No, I can't do this in 5 days. That's impossible. Well, yes, we know you can do it. Are you going to be uncomfortable for a couple of days? Big deal. A couple of days for the rest of your life? That's not a bad trade.
And I think that's important that you pointed that out, because many people don't realize that if they leave the disease untreated, and I know we had a question, so I'm going to have our producer bring that back up in just 1 second. But we know that if this isn't treated, it gets worse. It's not like you stay at the same level. Dr. Charles Smith, talk about that, because some people think, well, I'm managing it right now. I'm okay. I feel like I'm in control. It's not that bad. But this is a disease. So help us understand why that mindset is not correct.
Well, addiction is a progressive disease. So, with the development of tolerance to the drug, as well as damage to the dopamine receptors, we call that downregulation of the receptors, it takes more and more of the drug. It takes more potency of the drug just to feel normal again. So, without medically supervised detox, it's virtually impossible for people to quit. If left to their own devices, they simply won't quit. They will seek out another way to get the medicine, whether it's doing things illegally, doing things with their body that they wouldn't ordinarily do. Their impulse control gets damaged. There's damage to the decision maker, the prefrontal cortex. So without intervention, then things are very poor. It's a very poor prognosis. But with intervention and appropriate medically supervised detox, with followed up residential treatment, followed up outpatient, and then for a couple of years, you're still at a large risk because it's going to take the brain 2 years to heal. But I want
to get you to say that again. It takes the brain from the addiction 2 years to heal?
Yes, it takes the prefrontal cortex 2 years before the normal oxygenated hemoglobin returns to normal. So within the first 2 years, we still struggle with impulse control, sense of right and wrong, money values, relationship values, all the things that we see destroyed in most addiction patients' lives. It takes 2 years to improve now, or to heal. Now, I tell people that's not it's awful for a year and a half and then it gets better. It's a gradual slope. Certainly things are better at 6 months. Certainly things are better at 1 year. But I really start feeling like people are out of the woods when they've maintained abstinence for a year and they've developed coping skills to retrain their brain. At that point, we get very good lifetime success rates. Our problem is it's very difficult to get 2 years.
But what you said, you're 13 years out. So you're proof that if you work it, it can work. So I think, that's a message of hope there. We have a question that came in from Lisa. Do you see more occurrences of precipitated withdrawal with 8 milligram Gloxado? I hope I'm saying that right. And whoever wants to answer that question, one of our medical professionals who could help answer that question. Can we put it back up there just in case so we can make sure that everybody can see that?
I'll pop in. I think the whole point of using Narcan is to reverse opiates. So I wouldn't necessarily call it precipitated withdrawal, but you're going to cause instant withdrawal. And that's actually the goal, because if you're not breathing, we need to reverse that opioid in your brain instantly. And the goal is to put you into withdrawal immediately so that we can save your life and bring you back.
And I would say this, most of the ones that I've been involved in, I haven't had anybody come out with the anger. I hear that a lot. I don't see that. Most of them come out really groggy and make the comment, what just happened? That's, I don't see a whole lot of people jumping up going, oh, you just took away my high. That hasn't happened. Although whenever we're doing the training, when I'm training people, I always allude to the fact they could, And I've had other people that train me say that, but that's not been my experience. And you're going to ultimately, I can't remember any time that I've given somebody less than 8 milligrams, whether it was using Narcan at 4, doing 2 or 3, or the Clexato at 8. I'm now carrying the 8 myself, but I still give out doses of 4 milligrams to a lot of people when I'm on the street.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know I butchered the name of the drug right then, but Clexato, we were talking about, it's another higher dosage of naloxone. Like we talked about Narcan being a version that you can buy. Can people get Clexato, or however, if I'm saying it wrong there, correct me, but is that available for purchase as well? Or is that only for medical professionals and they'll have to either give 2 doses of a Narcan or a 4 milligram version?
I think it's very available. The Rotary Club has a deal where they're doing it now.
Mm-hmm.
To all their members. So no, it's available. I mean, it's just a stronger version. It would have the exact same effect as Rebecca just demonstrated for us. If somebody doesn't need it, a pregnant woman, she's passed out on the sidewalk, and you come up and you administer it, it goes right through. Doesn't matter if it's 8 milligrams. If there's no opioid in the body, it's gonna just pass through. It will be, there's nothing to attach to.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I do want to ask about this, Dr. Lipnack, you can explain this. When somebody's coming out of this, you've given them the Narcan or the other drug that we talked about. What are the symptoms of withdrawal? Is it the same as if they were detoxing? Because we talked about this can be excruciating. So how does it compare? Is it the same? And are they going to need that medical attention right away? I know Philip was saying, hey, you need to make sure when you see this that you've called 911 because you want to get medical attention there. But can you answer that question in terms of the symptoms that we're seeing? And does it mimic an actual, like if they were in a treatment facility and they're going through a detox program?
I have not had experience with that. So I'm the wrong person to ask for that. I've seen it on a couple of occasions, but rarely have I been there when somebody has gotten Narcan. So I can't answer that question well.
Mm-hmm. Can anybody else answer that question? Rebecca, I know you've been there, or Dr. Smith?
I've had a little experience with it. The one thing, as Philip alluded, we call 911 whenever we've administered. So they go off to the hospital setting, usually a few days before they come back. But in my training at University of Florida, we would get them back a little quicker. My experience was in the first 24 to 48 hours, they experienced typical opiate withdrawal. At that point, we administered buprenorphine and it works well. My experience with them waking up was the same as Philip's. I haven't had this massive, oh my God, I'm in horrible withdrawal. My skin's crawling. I've got body aches and all that. They're uncomfortable. That's the general thing I see. But we do know from some studies that have been published, your highest risk of overdose death is after someone gets Narcan, has a short hospital visit, and is released. So it's a worst case scenario that they're released from emergency department out on the street because they simply are going to face withdrawal in the next 48 hours and they're going to use. Plus they have this overwhelming craving that hasn't been dealt with.
Do we also know if somebody's overdosed once, are they more susceptible to overdose again? Do we know that? Have there been any research? And I don't know when it takes that question, and maybe we don't know, but I'm curious, if you've overdosed once before, are you more susceptible? Have you guys seen anything related to that?
I think I'd leave it to the physicians. I mean, if you're an opioid user and you've overdosed, you're probably going to be an opioid user for a while.
I would agree with that. Certainly, our first time accidental overdose deaths are also very high. So I can't say that it's more likely. The culprit here is the massive strength and power of the fentanyl and the unknowing of how strong our particular brand was. Was it cut 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, or was it straight stuff? So that in predictability makes it high risk using any recreational drug now, particularly if you requested opiates. but just as dangerous with cocaine, methamphetamine, the pressed pills, the Xanax pressed pills that are
Because it's
sold.
in press pills now. You're seeing it in the press pills.
Yes. Yeah, primarily that's what my patients are coming in with, not the powdered form, but they say pressed pills, and most they say they can tell it's either a little more crumbly or there's something about the texture, but they knew it was not a drug company manufactured pill. They can tell it's made in a home lab and pressed
That's
powder, even though it has some numbers on it. They will
That's
look virtually the same.
Well, I think that's a good question. You're getting me excited as you're talking there, because I wanted people to understand what different forms is this coming in. Are we seeing it in pills? Are we seeing it in powder? Can we walk through the forms that people are getting fentanyl in? And can you even tell it's fentanyl? Because I think, like you said, some people are like, well, I think I'm looked at this pill. It looks a little different, but can you really tell? I don't know who want to take that question, but I think that is interesting for us to know the forms. And can you tell? Is there any way to tell?
I'll say that back when we started seeing a lot of fentanyl being used in the community, it was people buying patches that were manufactured legally and through the FDA, and they were melting down, smoking the patches. And then once the illegal drug trade got more involved in it, it's when it started coming into powder. And now, predominantly in California, we're seeing the pressed pills. Now, a lot of these pressed pills we're seeing are the right color and the right markings of other drugs, but they're not those drugs. You may be thinking you're taking a 2 milligram Klonopin, and you may have bought it from the dealer thinking it's a 2 milligram Klonopin. It looks like it. It is the same color. You look it up on, the Drug Administration website, and it's got all the right markings, but you take it and you die because it's not. It's fentanyl.
And you're not even an opioid user. You were looking for benzos. This is the issue. The people, we just had 3 young kids, elementary school kids, die in the town, 2 towns over from us. And then they just arrested and convicted this young man, 21 years old, in my town, with 70,000 pills on him in his house. 70,000. You give those pills to a youngster that thinks they're party pills, they're going to die. That's more than 2 milligrams. They don't have a chance. But that's what happened to these young kids. Older people that are experienced probably could manage, but other people, they don't even. It goes back to where we started with both of our physicians, and Rebecca all said, you don't know what you're getting. But we know that if you're getting it on the street, you got a good chance of dying from it. Your chances are really remarkably high. 1 person every 4.5 minutes is dying. We probably had 12 people die while we were talking today.
So if there is, if you have any other questions, people, put your questions in the chat, because I'm wrapping up here. I want to ask a few other questions to our panel. So what's the answer to this? And I want to do this as kind of roundtable. We're facing this fentanyl crisis. They're changing the drug by little, tweaks. It's hard to detect sometimes. The fentanyl test strips don't always catch everything. We have people overdosing. Philip talking about, 1 every 4 minutes, which is, when you think about that, he said, how many people would have passed away? They're putting it in these counterfeit pills that they look like the real thing. You can't differentiate. So what do you feel is the answer? What can we do? What should we be doing? So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Smith. I'm going to go to you, Dr. Lipnack, and we're going to go down as we wrap up this panel. What can we do? What should we all know? And what would be your message tonight, your final message to everyone, Dr. Smith?
At the first sign that a friend or a loved one has signs of this at all, their behaviors change, maybe problems with money, maybe problems at work, any signs that this is going on, get them intervened on and get them into treatment. Once they're in treatment, and this is particularly important for our opioid use disorder patients, that they have medication-assisted therapy, either naltrexone, Vivitrol, the opiate blocker, very acceptable form of Medicaid assisted treatment, or buprenorphine. And either of these drugs will protect them while they're going through treatment, while they're going through early recovery, and even up to 2 years or longer, they're protected at that point. It decreases cravings. If they use an opiate, it's effectively blocked. You can use enough fentanyl to override it, so it's not 100% protection, but it is the way to go. So with medically assisted therapy, proper treatment, patient compliance, this epidemic can be eradicated. But it takes support of family, it takes willingness from patients, and it takes trained professionals at our treatment centers to administer this care.
Good advice there. Dr. Lipnack, what would be your takeaway that you would hope families or even someone who's struggling tonight would get from our conversation?
It's really important to, as Dr. Smith said, to recognize changes in behavior and also massive education. Massive education. Not don't say just say no. That doesn't work. But say, look, if you take this, it's 1,000 times more potent than this. And bang it in over and over and over again. If you take this, you die. If we can get people to do that, that's a beginning. We have to get them into treatment, obviously, but at least get the bug in their head that this is serious. A lot of people are in denial. The kid comes home and he's okay tonight. He's not. He's not okay. And the parents have to be aware. And then we're dealing with adults that are doing this too. Their wives have to be aware. But without the proper amount of information. And then the other thing is trying to stop this stuff, which is like, it's going to be the biggest job because you can put it in your watch pocket and kill a whole bunch of people. So it's too easy. It's too easy.
Good advice tonight, I think, for parents too, that don't just think this was the marijuana or the pills that maybe you experimented with in your youth. Philip, I know you can relate to that firsthand as a parent who had to revive their son, who thought I didn't think this would happen to me, So what would be your words of wisdom?
I just recently trained 12 nurses in a school district. And when I got done, I was training all of them in an elementary school. And what I left them with was somebody in this school right now has fentanyl on them. And they all looked at me like, no. I said, somebody in this elementary school has fentanyl on them. Whether they know it or they don't, somebody's got it. We need to teach people CPR and Narcan administration. We can't save people if they're not alive. We got to keep people alive, or we're waiting for the government or whomever it is, because we're not stopping this. Dr. Lipnack, just valid point. It's coming in. We got to keep people alive. And even the person that doesn't want to be alive, we got to keep them alive until we can sort this out.
Exactly. So, Rebecca, I end with you tonight. You're a nurse. You're at our Laguna Treatment Hospital. You've seen it all, I can imagine, in the time that you've been there. What would you like to say?
I think all the points have been made are very valid. I think one of the approaches I would love to see is, in addition to community education, that we need to work on destigmatizing substance use disorder. So many of our patients, in addition, mental health too, because as we've talked about, they are co-occurring, and there's such a negative stigma around both. Like, you're just crazy. I hate when I hear that. You're just crazy. Oh, you're just an addict. No, that's a person. That's a brother, a son, an uncle, whatever it is. They are a human, and we need to treat them as such. We need to destigmatize mental health, and we just destigmatize substance use disorders so these people don't feel ashamed and then keep using because they don't want to come out. We want them to come out. We want them to ask for help. We want them to seek out resources. And yeah, it may take 5 or 6 times, but maybe that 6th time is the time. And if you make them feel like they're not worth anything, they're not even going to attempt to seek that out. And so we need to take that stigma out so that these people are willing to get the help and able to get the help that they need.
Can I follow up with what she just said?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dr. Smith wrote a book, and it is so important that people read that book. You can get it on Amazon. It's not expensive, but it explains that this is a disease, and you just can't pretend it isn't. And you need it. Is everybody in our place that has that book say, "Jesus, I didn't know all this stuff. Did you read this too?" I said, "Yeah, I read it too. I had no idea. I'm not crazy. I got a disease." All of them, but some of them. And if we just get a couple of them, it's a masterful piece. And I'm not saying it because we work together. Okay. It's good. It's good.
And from a nursing perspective, if in a hospital, you wouldn't, tell a diabetic that they're a horrible person because they're eating that candy bar that they so craved, even if they're deep in their issues with food or their diabetes is really bad and they're still eating that candy bar. We're not going to go in and shame them. So we need to have that same approach with those with substance use disorders. And we need to make them feel cared for and that we want to help them so that they're more likely to reach out for that help.
One more thing, Joy. And I've been doing this work for a long time. I was with a friend doing a road trip, and Joe said to me, he said, "Well, we got to stop." I said, "Well, where you got to stop?" He said, "I got to go to a meeting." "What kind of meeting?" He said, "An AA meeting." I said, "Joe, you haven't had a drink in 15 years. He said, "That's right. I go to AA meetings." "How many?" "Sometimes 1, sometimes 3, sometimes 5. I go as much as I have to go." I said, "It's really surprising." He said, "What if I was a diabetic? And I said to you, I'm not taking my insulin today. What would you say?" I'd say, "You're a fool." He said, "If I don't go to those meetings, I'm a fool." Because it works. It works.
That's good. Good. So much good advice here tonight. And I think even just leaving with that as we honor International Overdose Awareness Day, that this is a disease. We need to destigmatize it. We need to continue to have conversations about this and helping people to know that there is help available. Dr. Smith, I know you have a book out there. Tell us the name of the book. As Dr. Lipnack talked about it, want to make sure that if somebody is looking for a resource right now, that could be something. But we also want them to know that we're here. American Addiction Centers. We've got treatment centers all across the country. If you are struggling, there is a phone number on your screen. Maybe you're a family member. We can help. If we can't help you directly, we can connect you to someplace that can help you, but we can be a resource. So Dr. Smith, please tell us the name of the book. I want to make sure that if somebody was just looking for something tonight as a first step to learn more about this disease, that they know that they can trust the information that's in there.
Thank you, Joy. My book is Understanding Addiction, No Science. That's KNOW, science, no stigma, NO stigma, a little play on words. It's available on Amazon, usually for $14, $15. Amazon varies the price, and it's usually deliverable in 2 days. Thank you.
Yeah. Good place to start if you're looking for information. But thank you all, our panelists, Dr. Charles Smith, Dr. Eric Lipnack, Philip Van Gilder, and Rebecca Westgard. We appreciate you, one, for all you do for the people who are struggling and for sharing your voice tonight to help us save a life. And that's going to do it for another episode of our Addiction Talk. Good night, everyone.